Star Trek DS9 turns Picard's beloved TNG episode into a horror story. Star Trek Deep Space Nine turns a beloved Captain Jean-Luc Picard, Patrick Stewart, episode of Star Trek The Next Generation into a horror story. Rather than discounting the optimism of Star Trek The Next Generation, Star Trek Deep Space Nine pushes Star Trek's optimistic future into a darker corner. Nowhere is that more clear than in the way that Star Trek Deep Space Nine puts TNG's first transfer to DS9, Chief Miles O'Brien, Cole Meany, in increasingly more horrific situations, with writers even coining the maxim, O'Brien must suffer. Chief Miles O'Brien certainly suffers in Star Trek Deep Space Nine Season 4, Episode 19, Hard Time, when the Argothi wrongly sentenced Miles to 20 years in prison on unfounded espionage charges. O'Brien's entire 20-year sentence is carried out in just hours through implanted memories that reflect the choices Miles would have actually made in prison, including killing his cellmate, Eacher Craig Wasson. Contrast Star Trek The Next Generation Season 5, Episode 25, The Inner Light, where an alien probe causes Captain Jean-Luc Picard to experience an entire life as Kamen, a family man on a dying planet, in only minutes. Star Trek DS9's Hard Time turns TNG's The Inner Light into a horror story using the concept of fast-forwarded, simulated memories like in Star Trek The Next Generation Season 5, Episode 25. The Inner Light, Star Trek Deep Space Nine's Hard Time, turns the beloved Captain Jean-Luc Picard episode into a horror story. In The Inner Light, Picard's simulated life on Catan is based on Kamen's actual memories, which serve as a memorial to Catan's people, and a warning to anyone passing through the dead planet system. In DS9, implanting memories without consent is a punishment tailor-made for Miles O'Brien, as O'Brien still feels the effects of his prison experience even in the real world. Instead of compartmentalizing the fake experience as easily as Picard did, O'Brien's implanted memories of being starved and tortured for 20 years are inescapable. Miles is haunted by visions of Eacher, the man he murdered for food scraps, as himself, not as another person from another time. Miles pushes away his wife Keiko O'Brien, Rosalind Chow, snaps at Dr. Julian Bashir, Alexander Siddig, and refuses therapy before O'Brien reaches the breaking point of nearly taking his own life. Chief O'Brien's desperate aftermath is a far cry from Captain Picard's road not taken, as the husband and father Jean-Luc never believed he could be. Star Trek TNG's Inner Light aliens could have made Picard's life much worse. Star Trek The Next Generation's The Inner Light aliens could have made Captain Jean-Luc Picard's life much worse if they had been like the Argothi from Star Trek Deep Space Nine. O'Brien suffers in Hard Time because the technology that allows someone to experience several years within moments is supposed to be torture, but Kamen's people used it to communicate with the future in the best way they knew how. If Picard had received PTSD and the ghost of the man he'd murdered as parting gifts instead of the Resican flute, Picard would be just as tormented as O'Brien. Star Trek only says that humanity is far more likely to bend than break in the 24th century, not that we will be completely unbreakable. Even though Picard rebounded from the experience easily, and O'Brien was nearly broken by his false memories, both characters are fine examples of Star Trek's evolved humanity, even if O'Brien fears otherwise. The difference is the show's intentions. Star Trek The Next Generation's The Inner Light isn't meant to break Jean-Luc because it's about Picard's experience and reflection. By contrast, Miles O'Brien must suffer in the intentionally unsettling aftermath that Star Trek Deep Space Nine's Hard Time focuses on. Star Trek Deep Space Nine, DS9, is often seen as the darker, grittier counterpart to The Next Generation, TNG, and nowhere is this contrast more evident than in how DS9 reinterprets the themes of one of TNG's most beloved episodes, The Measure of a Man. By shifting the ethical and philosophical dilemmas explored in the TNG episode into the shadowy, morally ambiguous world of DS9, the franchise turns a story about humanity's capacity for compassion into a chilling examination of how war and desperation erode those same values. DS9 doesn't just mirror The Measure of a Man, it turns its philosophical optimism into something far more horrifying. At its heart, The Measure of a Man is a courtroom drama that asks whether Data, an android and valued officer aboard the USS Enterprise, should be classified as property of Starfleet or as a sentient being with rights. The episode is a high point for TNG's exploration of ethics and artificial intelligence, highlighting the franchise's utopian ideals. Captain Jean-Luc Picard, ever the staunch defender of individual rights and human dignity, argues passionately that Data is not a machine, but a life form capable of choice, creativity, and growth. Ultimately, Picard wins the case, and the episode ends with a reaffirmation of Starfleet's commitment to protecting individual freedom, even for those who may not fit the traditional mold of human. Fast forward to DS9, and the same ethical quandary is twisted into something much darker in the episode Statistical Probabilities. Here, the question of what makes someone or something worthy of rights, dignity, and personhood is not as clear-cut as it was in TNG. The episode introduces a group of genetically engineered individuals who, due to severe mental instability, have been deemed unfit for normal society. Unlike Data, whose rights are upheld by a courtroom of his peers, these genetically modified humans are confined to a secluded part of the station, seen as a danger to both themselves and others. Where Picard's defense of Data in The Measure of a Man rested on the idea that every being has the potential for growth and self-determination, DS9 presents a scenario in which such optimism is challenged by the grim realities of war. In Statistical Probabilities, DS9's captain, Benjamin Sisko, must confront the possibility that some people, despite their remarkable intellect, may be irreparably broken, unable to integrate into society, and potentially too dangerous to allow freedom. The cold calculus of wartime decision-making, combined with the dark, morally ambiguous setting of DS9, turns the once clear-cut question of sentience and rights into something much more disturbing. The horror in DS9's interpretation comes from how it undermines the very principles that Picard so fiercely defends in TNG. While Picard's belief in Data's inherent worth is validated in The Measure of a Man, DS9 shows that not everyone is capable of living up to those lofty ideals. The genetically engineered characters in Statistical Probabilities are not villains, nor are they mindless drones. They are, in fact, some of the most brilliant minds in the galaxy, capable of processing information and making predictions at a level that far exceeds normal humans. Yet, their intelligence is paired with deep emotional instability, making them tragic figures. Unlike Data, who represents the triumph of reason and self-awareness, these individuals are living proof that intelligence does not guarantee stability, morality, or happiness. The episode's climax is particularly chilling when one of the genetically engineered characters, Jack, proposes a solution to the Dominion War that would involve the Federation's surrender. His coldly logical analysis suggests that resistance is futile and that countless lives could be saved by giving in to the enemy's demands. For Jack, this is not an ethical dilemma, but an equation to be solved. The other genetically engineered characters, having run the calculations themselves, agree with him. In their minds, survival is the only goal, and morality is an abstraction. This is where DS9 turns TNG's optimistic vision into a horror story. In The Measure of a Man, the focus is on an individual's right to choose their own path, to evolve, and to prove their worth. DS9, however, presents a terrifying counterpoint. What if that potential for growth isn't there? What if, in the brutal reality of war, the ideals that Picard held so dear no longer apply? Statistical Probabilities suggest that, under the harshest conditions, those ideals might be nothing more than illusions, and that survival may sometimes demand the sacrifice of individual rights and freedoms. DS9's brilliance lies in how it complicates the moral clarity of earlier Star Trek series. While TNG presents a universe where problems can be solved through diplomacy, logic, and compassion, DS9 explores the darker side of human nature and the ways in which utopian ideals are often tested and sometimes broken.